Now on the Income Store live video stream at 560theanswer.com.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy and Andy McCarthy over National Review.
Oh, by the way, I'm not Amy.
Oh, yeah, right, of course. Filling in for Amy this morning, Carol Roth, of course, author, podcaster, The Roth Effect, and regular Fox Business contributor, among any other things. And Andy McCarthy, Carol, asks a great question in the wake of Julian Assange's arrest last week. Well, why wasn't he charged with collusion with Russia? Prior to the publication of the stolen Dem Party emails, Podesta and others, internal documents, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks exhorted Russian government hackers to send them new material. That's what we're told by Mueller's indictment of Russia intelligence officers, the in absentia indictment. Assange wanted the Russians to rest assured that giving new material to WikiLeaks would have much higher impact than what they are doing. These are quotations from Mueller's indictment. So time is of the essence. It was early 2016. Hillary Clinton stopped right there. And then WikiLeaks warned proceedings at the imminent Democratic National Convention would solidify Bernie's support behind her. So why is there no Sanders Russia probe as it pertains to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange's activities per Mueller's own account of said activities?
I think it goes back to whether or not WikiLeaks is a platform and is a publisher and is acting as a journalist, or whether they're doing other things in terms of making, helping to get these documents in a way that would be viewed as collusion or hacking or something of that nature.
I think, we can debate the quintessential nature of WikiLeaks, but there's something else I think that McCarthy is pointing to. And that is, in 2016, the effort was to spy. Am I allowed to use that word? In the traditional sense?
In amongst us friends, you can use that word.
The Obama administration weaponized government to spy on the Trump campaign.
Correct.
That's what happened.
Correct.
And so they weren't
interested. By
interested.
the way, not disputed at all.
And they weren't, it's disputed by some.
But in reality, it's not disputed.
Well, sure, by the facts. But they weren't interested in other activities that may have occurred during the 2016 cycle, even as it pertains to Russian interference. It was all about Trump.
Correct.
And this lack of pursuing Assange for Russian collusion or an Assange-Sanders investigation, as McCarthy points out, is a really interesting and important point, as well as an insight. For more on these insights, including an identification of the location of Julian Assange's embassy cat, whether or not embassy cat is safely staying with Pam Anderson until this trial or till the adjudication of his case is concluded or not, we'll find out from Tom Rogan, who's a foreign policy and national security commentariat for Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com, and he also doubles as a golf commentator, apparently, too. Tom Rogan, thanks for joining us. Appreciate
Hi, Tom.
it.
Good to be with you guys. Good morning.
Good morning. So what about that point that McCarthy raises over at National Review about Julian Assange and helping Sanders, and what about and Mueller's own words in his indictment of Russian intel officers? What does that suggest about what was actually possibly going on in 2016?
Well, I had another piece last week, the day Assange was arrested, saying, why didn't they charge Assange with being a Russian agent? So very similar to Andy McCarthy's argument. But I think the basic question does need to be asked here in terms of this being a very obvious representation of prosecutorial discretion in the United States. The idea that a prosecutor can choose to both drive an investigation in a direction that they seek, but also bring charges in an area that they seek. Because I think manifestly on the evidence we have thus far, both of timing, coordination, communication, all the elements of a conspiracy under the law, Julian Assange, there would appear to be a very strong case, a prosecutable case, that Julian Assange acted on behalf of the Russian government, and charges were not brought. And then as an extension there, if you look at some of the synergy on the left, and a lot of this stuff doesn't get prosecuted because it comes under counterintelligence stuff. So it's more of the government, the FBI, NSA, learning about links and trying to, essentially develop an intelligence picture rather than a prosecution picture. But people like Jill Stein, people close to Bernie Sanders, groups associated with anti-fracking movements, all of these have echo talking points that the Kremlin provides in a way, and certainly on the anti-fracking stuff with financial links, in a way that would suggest collusion. And so, I think it is legitimate for people to ask, okay, we've done the 2-year Trump investigation. What's going on the other side here?
Yeah, I think that the fact that rules and laws are not applied equally is a point of major frustration for many Americans, certainly on the right. What can be done about it, though? If you're somebody who's sitting at home that's frustrated, how do you affect change?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, of course, the bedrock principle of the United States in terms of judiciary, equal justice under the law, inscribed, on the Supreme Court. But what can be done? Well, I think what we're seeing at the moment, there's increasing media scrutiny. Yes, it's coming from, unfortunately, it's coming predominantly from conservative media circles, even though, there's obvious public interest for, supposedly center-left or centrist media outlets to report on it. But also what we're seeing on Capitol Hill in terms of investigations, in terms of people pushing for more information, in terms of debates. I mean, one of the positive things here is that regardless of what you think in terms of their conduct, I have to say as a conservative, I'm more sympathetic to the idea that at least the FBI pursues its investigations with relative objectivity. When you have people like James Comey talking about the idea of spying not being spying, and again, I did another piece, MI5, which is the British equivalent of the FBI, at least in intelligence collection, on its own website, basically defines spying as exactly that which Comey said it is not. When you have these sort of more absurd comments, in some sense that's positive because it does open a window to other people and to new debates as to say, this is somewhat ludicrous, right? That it's not, that it's so obviously slightly absurd what some of these people are saying, that it actually does drive the conversation in a positive way.
It's interesting, the reaction to Assange's arrest last week, because it kind of crossed the ideological spectrum. You had the likes of Jonathan Turley and Dinesh D'Souza agreeing with Tulsi Gabbard and Glenn Greenwald that, essentially Assange deserves a medal. Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat congresswoman from Hawaii, is one of the 42 presidential candidates. She said his arrest is a threat to journalists, but it's also something that threatens every American because the message that we're getting, that the American people are getting by what's happened here today, his arrest, is be quiet, toe the line, otherwise there will be consequences. I don't think I agree with that. Do you think that's the message of arresting Assange for his conduct? Is he a journalist or is he something else?
No, I disagree with that quite strongly. I think it is clear if you look at the timing and the tenor of what he did in terms of what he chose to target, his background, as he was a former employee effectively of the Russian government by working for their West-focused propaganda outlet RT. He has expressed repeatedly pro-Putin sentiments which would suggest a measure of direct sympathy to Russian foreign policy objectives. And in his conduct, in what he has chosen to release, the scale, journalistic ethics demand that there are rules in terms of certainly handling sensitive sources. Obviously, you're allowed in the United States to try and write things with sources who are telling you stuff they are not supposed to be telling you. But in terms of, especially, I think the WikiLeaks release, the two things that stand out clearly are the release of the DNC emails, which he would have known would have had to have come from a very capable actor with a manifest interest. And frankly, Russia would have been at the top there. But also the WikiLeaks State Department cables and U.S. military documentation. That is stuff that you could make an argument that some of it had a public interest motive. But when you judge the collective effort on the part of WikiLeaks, I think the abundant evidence today would suggest that it is what intelligence terms would be called a cutout, which is an intermediary, a deniable intermediary for in this case, a hostile foreign government, being Russia. And so the idea that somehow he's just a journalist who's being treated unfairly, I think, does not comport with the facts. And if we look at, the evidence that we're getting now in terms of the Ecuadorian president saying, well, actually, he was continuing to do this espionage, he was a negative interest, but also in the way that WikiLeaks presented this stuff. And there's one example here that always gets talked about. The collateral murder video that WikiLeaks released, which supposedly shows a U.S. Apache gunship killing innocent people in Baghdad in 2007. The actual nature of that video does not show that which WikiLeaks says it to show. And again, you can look at. I want to keep saying I've done a piece on this, but there are, viewing the video, you can see an RPG, you can see armed men, and the context, which also gets ignored, is that the unit that Apache was trying to support suffered some of the highest casualty rates in the surge. The U.S. Army unit was a 15-month deployment. David Finkel writes about it in The Good Soldiers. And WikiLeaks completely misrepresented that in a way that was negative to the interest of the United States.
Let me play devil's advocate here, because you can pick a mainstream media outlet, pick the New York Times, pick the Washington Post, pick whichever one you want, and you can probably find a whole slew of journalists who have bias against the president or under the previous administration towards President Obama, who misrepresent facts, who publish all kinds of things. I mean, all the things that you're describing are things that are done in the mainstream media every day, which is why so many people have this distrust of the media. Is it really that different than what we've seen from so many journalists?
Well, I do think it is, for the simple reason. I mean, there is a difference between being biased towards the president, which is clearly protected under the First Amendment, whatever we regarded it, and people should be more selective with their media choices as a response to that. And so ultimately, I don't so much blame the media as the people who read those media outlets and pretend that it's objective when it self-evidently is not. But the difference specifically with Assange and WikiLeaks is the interest, which is harming the United States manifestly, not harming Trump, clearly harming the United States. The coordination with Russia in terms of timing, in terms of content generation, and then the communications. And this will be the new story, I think, that comes out in the coming months. I think it will probably be referenced quite significantly in the Mueller report. Hopefully it won't be redacted. But the measure of communication between WikiLeaks and coordination with the Russian government or Russian intelligence officers is significant and will, in that regard, show, I think, that clearly WikiLeaks was acting as a conspirator for Vladimir Putin's interests. And Vladimir Putin is not he is not a friend of the United States, to put it bluntly.
All right, I got to ask you, because you wrote about it. The legends always seem to have a Ponce de Leon moment. Nicholas at 46 and 86 winning his last major Masters. Woods yesterday at 43 winning his last major at the Masters? ?
No, I don't think so. I think this will be a sort of rebirth for him. And I mean, you see, he's in good shape. Obviously, the way he played, I also sense that it's just a perception. I am not a golf journalist. My little brother and my father, who live in Florida, would be far better place to assess this. But I think Tiger Woods, getting that win, the sense of relief there, the family reaction, just hitting that nail on the head, putting something to bed, like the Red Sox in 2004, right? I think it's going to be one of those keystone moments in which he is driven forward. We shall see. But look, I think it was a special moment, and that's what sort of motivated me to write about it.
Yeah, no, he still definitely has the nerves of Valerian steel, no question. Tom Rogan, foreign policy and national security commentariat for Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Check out all of his writings there. Tom, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.